And thank you for listening to the Sales Maven Show. I'm your host, Nikki Roush, your own personal sales maven, here to offer you tips and strategies and techniques to master your sales conversations. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about navigating difficult corporate sales and giving you some confidence tips specifically for women dealing with the know it all clients. Now, the reason I chose to do an episode about this is because this has come up a few times recently with some coaching clients and wanting some feedback and some different strategies. So I thought, well, if I have a couple people asking about it, there might be other people out there, maybe you as a listener, if you're selling into corporate and or if you've just ever experienced coming into contact with somebody who has that know-it-all, little bit of a condescending type attitude. What are some things that you can do to set yourself and them up for success to potentially either earn their business or in some cases, bless and release? So that's what we are going to be talking about. One of the things that you want to do very early on in a conversation to help with the know it all clients is establish your authority. So, how do you do that? First and foremost is you ask permission to lead the meeting. So, I teach often about pre-framing the start of your calls so that it allows for you to take the lead in the meeting. Because if you have somebody who will kind of steamroll over you or steamroll over the conversation, it can feel like it puts you on your back foot and it can sometimes derail the purpose of the meeting and you never really get the information that you need to earn their business. So, really important that you ask permission to lead and you do that typically with a pre-frame. So, an example of a pre-frame would be saying to somebody, now, in order to make this meaningful and productive, this time together, is it okay if I start with a few quick questions? That is asking permission to lead. And most of the time, people will say yes. Now, if you have somebody that's like, no, they're just going to steamroll over, then another technique that I would bring in here is to establish your authority. You might need to drop before asking your question, you might need to drop in a little bit around your expertise. So, for instance, let's say that you want to establish expertise and you want to ask a question as well. So, here's an example. I might say, in my 25 plus years of selling to large organizations like NASA and the Gates Foundation, often companies have a certain procurement process. I'm wondering, is that the same in your organization? Or how does that work in your organization? Now, notice I dropped that little here's some credibility about me before I asked a pretty kind of standard direct question, what's your procurement process? So, can you bring any of that into the conversation? I think that can be very helpful. Oftentimes, as it kind of lets people know, oh, okay, I'm talking to an expert. Now, the other thing is to be thinking about your questions. Are you asking powerful and engaging questions? And when you do that, it helps kind of shift a little bit of dynamic when you're talking to somebody who maybe is making some assumptions about you or doesn't know much. Um, but we want to do is we want to put them in the position through the question to be the expert because sometimes they just need to be seen as the expert in the room. You need to acknowledge who they are and all that they bring to the table in order for them to kind of calm down and kind of lean into the process with you. So, one of the ways that you could do this is you could ask them, what has been your experience when you work with outside consultants? Because now you allow for them to share what their experience has been. And then you can also talk to the ways in which you can continue to support them in that way. Or if they have an experience that they didn't particularly like, it gives you the ability to have that information to use about how working with you, how you'll ensure that that will be a different experience for them. The other thing is you could ask them about expectations. What are your expectations on the way in which somebody that you bring in from the outside might, let's see, let me think about how to ask this. What are your expectations on the way in which a consultant communicates what might be a new and different approach to leadership for you? So notice I'm planting a seed that if I was a leadership coach, I want to bring in some new and different approaches, and I want to know what their preferred way or what their expectations are about how to communicate that with them. So it plants the seed about my expertise, but it also allows for them to share their preference. So this will help kind of like, I was like, think about you want to calm the waters. How can you calm the waters with people? And sometimes it's just in the way that you phrase questions. And then let's say that you want to set yourself up that you want them to be seen, or you want them to see you more as a partner or as a potential, like, yeah, strategic partner. And how can you phrase things that would allow for them to, you plant the seed about it, but then you ask them the question and allow them to be the expert. Because when you ask questions, the person answering the question is essentially the expert in that moment. So it shows respect to this person, but you can plant a little bit of a seed as well. So you could say, for instance, here's an example. One of my clients at a Fortune 500 organization was initially skeptical of making any changes to his particular coaching approach or leadership approach, or whatever you insert whatever your context is here. And within 2 sessions of us working together, he was comfortable enough to be open to trying something new, which actually led him to get a promotion that resulted in, this change in his leadership style, um, and was really recognized by his organization. So I'm wondering, do you have a specific goal in regards to your role in your organization that you'd like to obtain? And would you find value in having a trusted partner to support you in reaching your goal? So notice I plant a seed about what another client has experienced. Now, only say things that are true here. Actually pull from a real life example. And then you would ask a question. I experienced this. There was a point in my career when I have shifted. I come from the tech background and specifically in audiovisual. And I spent many of my years at building a lot of success on the visual side of technology. So this was selling display systems. And then at one point, I got this position where I was selling encrypted wireless audio conferencing equipment. Super technical stuff. And the people that were, I was going in to meet with, they were engineers, audio engineers. And I don't know if you've ever heard me say this. Maybe I've said it on the podcast before. It was pretty intimidating. I was fairly young. I was still pretty young in my career, and I probably looked even younger than I was, um, and didn't have a tremendous experience or background in audio because I had all this experience in video. And so when I would go in, these audio engineers would like always want to prove how smart they were, prove how good they were. I used to say they could hear things that I always say, like a dog couldn't even hear that. Like they would comment on these like certain audio frequencies and things like that, things that just were not my expertise. And they wanted to be the know-it-all in the room. And they loved to correct and interrupt my presentations and demonstrations. But what I had to do is be able to stand in my place of credibility and speak about my product and my solution while still giving respect to what their knowledge base was. So a lot of times if they would interrupt the meeting or, make some comment about some audio frequency that I didn't even know what they were talking about, I would say, "Thank you so much for your input. I really appreciate your level of expertise. Obviously, I am not an audio engineer. What I can speak about is our product and how it works in these types of situations." And then I would like go on with my presentation. So I would show respect to the person for their expertise, but I would also stand in my place of credibility and authority and talk about what I could speak about. So I'm not here to, you know, tell you you're wrong or challenge you in any way about your, incredible ability to pick up some audio wave, whatever. No, I can just speak about my product, my solution, the results that clients get. So that's another place for you to be thinking about when you have those know-it-all clients. You can still acknowledge who they are and what they bring to the table, and not have to diminish yourself or shrink or be small in any way. The other thing I would encourage you to be thinking about is when you are encountering somebody who has a little bit of this either know-it-all, or I would say this is maybe more for that condescending behavior. My suggestion is always take a step back and get curious. And when I say get curious, it's ask yourself, have I created an environment of safety? Because if somebody doesn't feel safe, they usually will go into fight, flight, or freeze. And so in this particular case with a know-it-all or somebody who's condescending, it shows up as fight. They get a little bit argumentative. They want to challenge a little bit around that. I remember years ago being in a training with people who were, I would say, prisoners in the room. So I always say when a company hires you to come in and train their staff, you get, actually, I got this from my NLP teacher. You get one of three types of people. You get learners, people who are excited to learn something new and totally open to it. You get vacationers. People are like, I'm just so happy I don't have to sit at my desk all day and like pick up the phone and make sales calls. And then you get prisoners, people who resent being in the room. So here I am at this training for this organization, and I definitely had a couple prisoners in the room. And one of them in particular, when I was sharing a little bit about my background and how I got to be there with them, and I had mentioned my background around neurolinguistic programming, and he said, I think he even stood up and he said, NLP was developed by the military and it's all about brainwashing. So pretty like confrontational and also totally inaccurate. It actually wasn't developed by the military. It was developed by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. And yeah, so in those moments, I think to myself, how can I get curious and how can I create safety in the room for him? And I would say, and so what I said was, wow, thank you so much. I've actually never heard that before. You know, what I know to be true about NLP is that it was developed by Richard Bandler and John Grinder out of, I believe it was UC Santa Cruz. So you might have some information that I don't have, but thank you for sharing it. And then I continue on. And I will say, within about 2 hours, the prisoner had turned into a learner. It was like, I'm going to create safety. I'm not going to challenge you. I'm not even saying what you're saying is wrong. I'm just going to say what I know or, you know, what I've experienced or what my background is that this is what I learned about it. And I really appreciate your insight. I'm not going to say like, that's garbage, you're wrong, right? Because then that escalates the situation. So when you have somebody, can you get curious and take a step back and ask yourself, have I created safety? And if not, what can I do to create safety? And a lot of times, just by acknowledging the person and their knowledge base, whether it's accurate or not, just having some appreciation for somebody who's willing to speak up in the room. Like, I really appreciate your input. Thank you so much for sharing that. What my background and what my experience has shown me is XYZ. So, you know, what you do with your voice and how you approach this will also determine how somebody engages and reacts with you. But if you can be curious and if you can create safety, a lot of times you can win these people over. Now, here's the next thing to try, right? So I've given you a few language examples. One of the other things that you want to check out when you have somebody who is being a little condescending or confrontational and or the know-it-all in the room is there are people out there with what's known as a polarity response. Well, let's be honest, every single person listening, including me talking, we all have a polarity response. A polarity response is taking the opposing view to what somebody said. Sometimes polarity is triggered by it's context specific. So it could be a topic that triggers your polarity response. Sometimes it's a person or a situation that can trigger a polarity response. Sometimes you could be having a bad day and it will trigger a polarity response. Now, for some people, it has become a behavioral trait. Like that's how they show up in the room. And oftentimes you'll see it, especially if you're in a group of people, like the people who work with this person, they'll already be familiar with this person's polarity response. They'll be like rolling their eyes and be like, oh gosh, here he goes again, you know? And your job is to earn the business. Your job is to build rapport. Your job is to build relationship and make rapport deposits. So when you find that somebody is been triggered and or is showing up with a polarity response, you have to be able to switch your language. Now I have a whole training on this inside the Sales Maven Society. I think it's actually in the Sales Maven studio as well, because it's so important to learn how to address people with polarity responses. So just a little bit deeper here. So again, polarity response is you say something, somebody takes the opposing view. So you say true, they say false. You say black, they say white. You say up, they say down. You say love, they say hate. You say, gosh, I heard it might rain later. And they're like, really? It's so sunny out. By the way, some of these people live in your house with you. Some of these people are your significant others, your best friends, your family members. Polarity response. And so when you have a client or a prospect that is showing this polarity response, whatever you say, they try to correct or they try to prove that you're wrong, you immediately want to learn how to shift some language. If you want deeper dive on polarity, which I do recommend everybody do a deep dive on polarity, come check out one of the trainings or do a little bit of research around it. But here is where you've got to learn how to shift your language. So you cannot say to somebody, you know what you should do? You should do this, because their polarity will say, oh, no, I shouldn't. Or you should say, if you said something like, this has been my experience, they'll say, well, my experience is completely opposite of that. Or I actually changed the name, by the way, of what I was going to call this episode, because I know what I had originally planned to call it would trigger somebody's polarity response. And I just was like, I'm not interested in having somebody, message and be triggered by this polarity response with me. So I'm going to change it. And not that doesn't mean that I still won't get this, but I won't get it as to what I was going to call this episode. But it's like, whatever you say, somebody has to go, yeah, but this, yeah, but that, right? So you have to make it easier for them to move in the direction that you want to move them. So instead of saying, you know what you should do? You should do this, because they'll say, no, that's a bad idea. I've already tried it. Doesn't work. You would say, I'm not sure you'd be open to considering this. Because what's the opposite of, I'm not sure that you'd be open to considering this? Yes, I would be open to considering it. Tell me more. That's the opposite. Or you might say, this may not even be something that you want to talk about. What's the opposite of, this may not be something you want to talk about? Yes, I do want to talk about it. Let's talk about it. So learning how to shift your language a little bit, and you can test the waters. You can't always identify somebody's polarity response right off the bat, but you can test the waters by shifting your language and seeing if that gets more compliance, that gets more conversation moving in a more productive situation, because that's where we're going. All right. The last suggestion that I have, when you encounter somebody with this know-it-all or condescending behavior, the worst thing you can do, the biggest mistake you can make, is get defensive. Because it's like, the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and then they're like, ooh, I've pushed this person's buttons, so now I have to like double down, and it will just get worse. We don't want it to get worse. We want it to get better. So take a step back, and instead of getting defensive, look for ways to be curious. And sometimes you have to fake it till you make it on the curious thing. So it's learning how to shift your body language. That could be, shifting to the side, tilting your head a little bit, looking up, asking questions instead of like full, if you see the video of this, you'll be able to see like sitting up, full front, like confrontational type behavior, body language, squinting your eyes a little bit or acting in any way defensive or confrontational will cause the other person to like dig in. It's like, I drew a line in the sand. I'm not going to cross it. I'm going to like really double down here and make it even more uncomfortable for you. So Look for ways to be curious, show it in your body language and in the questions and in your voice. And then the last thing is you develop what's known as selective amnesia. This is something I learned when I was studying NLP. And actually, the reason that I learned about selective amnesia is because I had taken a job with this company where we had rep firms that supported us in the field with our dealers and distributors. So oftentimes, when I would travel to a location, the rep firm would take me around and we would do demonstrations, meet with clients, meet with, dealers and distributors, and go and give presentations. And I always, was the like doing the dog and pony show, but they were kind of in charge of the schedule while I was in town. And there was one of our dealer reps in particular who was right off the bat very condescending. The first phone call I ever got from him, and technically, by the way, like he was a consultant, but he worked for us, so he could be fired. But the very first phone call I ever got from him was to say, don't ever call this particular account directly because I have the relationship with them. Now, in this particular instance, one of the reasons I was hired at the company was because of my relationship with the account. He was telling me not to call. At the previous company I'd worked for, I was doing over $30 million a year with this account. I was well established with them. As a matter of fact, they even gave me an award one year. They'd never given out an award to a single individual. They always gave like a company award at their big awards dinner, like for their best vendor partner. But they actually gave me an award one year for being their best rep that they had. And this was it was a really big deal with hundreds of other vendors and sales reps in the room. So I had a really good relationship with this particular account. So it was ridiculous for this person to call me and tell me not to talk to this account that, he had the relationship. So I remember, and I think he even hung up on me. So it just so happened I went to my NLP training that weekend. I was having a private conversation with my NLP teacher, and that's when she told me about selective amnesia. She's like, you know what? Sometimes in life, you got to be tough, Nikki. And you need to be able to just say what you need to say. And sometimes that's going to be interpreted, especially by a man, as, the B word. But once you say what you have to say, then you get selective amnesia. You act as if the next time you engage with this person, you're fine. We're fine. Most of the time, they'll go along with it. So I did have to have a pretty uncomfortable conversation with this person and let him know how I expected him to engage with me and interact with me. And if he had a problem with that, he could give up our line and we'd give it to another dealer rep. And then the next time I talked to him, I think I actually had to like go to his territory and do a ride day with him. I just acted as if we were fine. And he went along with it. And as a matter of fact, when I left the company, I wasn't there that long, but when I left the company, he was calling saying like, I've never worked with anybody that's like you. I just appreciate you so much. And I just don't know how they're ever going to replace you. Like he just was like pouring all this like really nice love onto me. But we had to get past that, like, hey, you don't get to treat me this way. This is how we're going to engage with each other on a professional level. You don't have to like me. I don't really care if you do or not, but this is how you're going to engage with me. And this is how I'm going to engage with my clients, like, period. And then we're fine. Selective amnesia. So there might be times where maybe something hasn't gone great with this particular person that you're engaging with. And you might need to have an uncomfortable conversation. But next time you have a conversation with them, you have selective amnesia. You act as if we're fine. Because if you want to hold on to it and hold a grudge, guess what? They'll hold on to it and hold a grudge too. And how will things ever get better? Sometimes by being able to do this, you'll find that you will create a lot of loyalty because people will go, oh, she's got boundaries. I see these boundaries. I know how to engage with her now. I feel safe, right? Just like they say with parents, you got to have boundaries with kids. It creates safety for them. You have to create safety. with your clients and the vendors and the people that you work with. And sometimes that means having uncomfortable conversations and then sending the message like, that's done. We're putting it behind us. We're fine now. And giving them a chance, right? Like give people a chance to like do better versus hold something against them. All right. Last, as we wrap up, a few last comments here. Always remember it is your job to earn the business. So, does it make sense for you to apply some of these techniques we've talked about, changing up your language with polarity, bringing selective amnesia in there, changing the way you frame your questions, and pre-framing at the start of the call? All of these things will help set you up for success when you find yourself in these like kind of difficult, choppy waters. And then the last thing I want to leave here is the majority of the people that listen to this podcast are, business owners, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs in a lot of cases. Maybe you have a team of people, but ultimately you're the decision maker. And remember that you get to pick your clients as much as they get to pick you. So if you're working with somebody where it's just untenable, the relationship or the way that they engage with you is so disrespectful or so over the top, there are times where you just want to bless and release. And it's okay to do that. Now, anytime you bless and release from a sales, like the sales coach in me wants to say, okay, and then take that energy, that time, that like mental, whatever space that was being taken up by this person and use that to go find your next client or develop a deeper relationship and, expand your relationship with an existing client who you do enjoy working with. And when you want to bless and release somebody, it is absolutely okay to say to them, based on our interactions so far, I get a sense that I'm not the right partner for you. So I'm going to respectfully decline taking our conversation any further, or it could be our relationship or our business, however you want to do this. I wish you well. Thank you so much for your time today. And then you end the conversation. You bless and release. You don't need to point out, well, you said this to me that one time and you acted this way to me in another time. No, just be really cut and dry and like respectfully decline continuing our relationship. And I wish you well. You don't need much more than that. All right. I am wishing you personally so much success in all that you're doing. And for those of you out there selling into corporate, it takes a special little bit to be able to earn that corporate business. It's not easy. I see you. I recognize you. I support you. And if there's any way I can continue to support you on a deeper level, please reach out. If you found some part of this particular podcast episode helpful or useful to you in some way, would you either reach out to me and let me know, leave a review for the podcast. I always appreciate reading those reviews. Thank you so much for those of you who take the time to do it, and or share it with somebody who you know that would benefit from this particular message. All right. Again, wishing you continued success. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day.